The bow drill is a popular method of friction fire that is useful for fire starting if you don't have a lighter or matches. In this video, I will go over how to make a bow drill set and how to properly use one. There are 6 components to the bow drill: the hearthboard, the spindle, the bow, the socket, the ember pan, and the tinder. The spindle rubs on the hearthboard, generating friction and heat. The bow is what rotates the spindle. The socket is what holds the spindle down. The ember pan catches the coal or ember produced by the friction, and the tinder turns the ember into a flame. There are numerous combinations of softwoods and hardwoods that work well for the bow drill, but to make things simpler, make your spindle and hearthboard from the same softwood tree. 3 great friction firewoods in the Northeast are basswood, cedar, and balsam fir. Again, there are plenty of other woods that work as well, but these 3 are some of my favorites. What we're looking for is a dead branch or tree that's relatively free of water or resin. The drier the wood, the better. Your hearthboard can range from something the size of your forearm to something the size of a chocolate bar, but should be between ½ an inch to an inch thick. If you have a saw on you, harvesting a hearthboard will be a lot faster, but a knife will work just fine. Even stone tools can do if you have the patience and the skill. If you're new to the bow drill, I recommend using a larger hearthboard so you have more space for attempts. To make your hearthboard, you can whittle away the top and bottom into flat surfaces. If you're using a larger piece, you can split it lengthwise by using an axe or batoning it with a knife. To make your spindle, cut a straight piece of wood about the length of your hand and the thickness of your thumb. Round one of the ends and sharpen the other. Your spindle should resemble a pencil. To make your bow, cut a curved piece of wood the length of your arm. Both greenwood and deadwood work for this. Carve a pair of notches at a 45-degree angle on both ends. This will hold your bowstring. Paracord is great material for a bowstring, as are most nylon ropes, but even your shoelace or natural cordage can do. Tie your string tight enough so the tension wants to release from the spindle, but not so tight that you struggle to get it in. To make your socket, find a stone or a piece of green hardwood that fits comfortably in your hand. Bones and shells can work as well. If you're using a stone socket, use the tip of your blade to form a tiny dimple in the center. If you don't want to dull your tip, use a sharp piece of a harder rock, such as quartz. If you're using a wood socket, you can split the piece of wood in half to make it easier to hold the spindle in place. Making an ember pan is as simple as grabbing a thin wood chip or using a dry leaf. You just want something thin enough to fit under your hearthboard and dry enough to catch your ember. The final piece to your set is your tinder. Your tinder should be at least the size of a softball and be made of fine and dry material. Good tinder material includes cedar bark, dead grass, and old man's beard. Now with your set complete, it's time to do the actual bow drilling. Find a flat piece of ground clear of any debris that might get in the way of your bow. If the ground is moist, use a piece of bark or other dry material to create a barrier between your hearthboard and the ground. You don't want your wood absorbing unwanted moisture. Use your blade to carve a dimple as thick as your spindle in your hearthboard. You don't want this hole to be too deep. This hole should be around ½ an inch from the edge of your hearthboard. This is the pilot hole and will be guiding your spindle during the fire making process. If you're right-handed, you'll be holding the bow in your right hand and the socket in your left hand. If you're left-handed, it's the other way around. Twist the bowstring around your spindle so there is one loop around it. The spindle should also be on the outside of the bow. That way, your spindle won't hit your bow if it's made from less of a curve. Wrap your socket holding arm around your leg. Your inner wrist should be locked around your shin. This is to ensure the spindle is steady and well balanced. During the bow drilling process, you'll really want that arm braced against your leg for the most stability. Now place the blunt end of the spindle in the pilot hole, with the sharp end in the dimple of your socket. You should be putting a fair amount of pressure on the spindle, somewhere around 10 to 20 pounds. Some people will tell you to put an insane amount of pressure, but too much will just slow your rotations in the long run and tire you out sooner. Begin with a light amount of pressure and slow speed from the bow. You may find it easier to just barely rotate the spindle for the first few seconds until the pilot hole becomes smoother. Once the spindle feels steady, use the full length of your bow to get the most RPMs out of your motions. Your bow should be moving parallel to the ground so that you're not kicking up any dirt. Slowly increase speed and pressure until you start to see some smoke and dust forming around the pilot hole. Once you see brown dust, you should stop. This isn't the actual fire attempt, we're just preparing the notch. We don't want to go too deep or else we'll be using up too much of our hearthboard material. Cut a V-notch into your hole about 1/6 of the circle, stopping right before the center. Make sure your notch has an even depth on both sides. This is where the dust is going to concentrate to form our ember. Afterwards, place your ember pan at the base of the notch to keep your ember off the ground. Steadily increase speed and pressure until you have a steady stream of smoke and dark-colored wood dust. Keep going at this pace until you have a dust pile about the size of a cherry. This may take anywhere from 20 seconds to 2 minutes depending on your set and technique. Once you're there, go at a faster speed and higher pressure for a few more seconds. This is to ensure your bow drill has reached a temperature hot enough to ignite the dust pile. Once you see smoke coming from the dust pile and not the notch, you have an ember. Carefully remove the hearthboard off the ember pan. You can tap your spindle on it a few times to free up the ember if it's stuck. Gently fan the ember with your hand to give it some extra air. Dust will begin to turn black and you will start to see an orange glow. An ember occurs because the dust you produced is so hot that it is pulling in its own oxygen, and that's why we're seeing it smoking. All the ember needs now is fuel and a little more oxygen. An ember is very delicate and can break apart easily. Carefully transfer your ember into the center of your tinder bundle. Fold over the tinder so that you can barely see the ember, but don't cover it too much or else you risk smothering it. Begin by gently blowing on it. As you see more smoke, blow harder. You'll start to see an orange glow in the center of your tinder, which means you're almost at a flame. You can either continue holding the tinder or place it sideways on the ground. Keep blowing until you produce a flame. There's a lot more tips and tricks when it comes to the bow drill, like how to tell if a wood is too resinous, or how to produce a backup ember, but I'll cover that kind of information in future content. If you're new to the bow drill, you'll probably be using 100% of your energy to reach an ember. Once you become more experienced, you'll gain the strength and technique to make the process almost effortless. It will likely take you dozens of attempts until you get your first bow drill fire, so don't get your hopes down if you're not getting it right away. It literally took me hundreds of tries before I even got my first ember. There are countless variables at play when doing the bow drill, so if you fail, remember to ask yourself, what went wrong? Perhaps the spindle tip was too dull. Perhaps your arm became too tired. Getting your first bow drill fire isn't satisfying because it was easy, but because it took patience and hard work to get there. So remember to always try to improve your next attempt and never give up.